Why World War I started. Welcome to our video. Today, we're diving into the fascinating and complex history of World War I, also known as the Great War. We'll uncover the reasons behind its outbreak, from rising tensions across Europe to the fateful event that triggered the conflict. You'll learn about the brutal realities faced by soldiers, why the Western Front became a deadly stalemate, and how the war ended with lasting consequences for the world. Stay with us as we explore the causes, key moments, and aftermath of one of the deadliest wars in history. What triggered World War I? The immediate trigger for World War I was the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand, the heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne, on June 28, 1914. He was killed in Sarajevo, Bosnia, by Gavrilo Princip, a Bosnian Serb nationalist who was part of a group seeking independence for Slavs from Austro-Hungarian rule. Austria-Hungary, backed by Germany, issued an ultimatum to Serbia where the assassins were based. When Serbia did not fully comply, Austria-Hungary declared war. This set off a chain reaction as alliances activated, pulling many countries into the conflict. Who killed Archduke Franz Ferdinand? The man who assassinated Archduke Franz Ferdinand was Gavrilo Princip. He was a 19-year-old member of the Black Hand, a secret society that promoted the idea of unifying all South Slavs, including those under Austro-Hungarian control, into a single nation. Princip's actions directly led to Austria-Hungary's declaration of war on Serbia, which quickly escalated into a full-scale war involving much of Europe. What was it like to be a soldier in the war? For soldiers, World War I was brutal and often horrifying. The war introduced new forms of weaponry, including machine guns, tanks, and chemical weapons like mustard gas. Most soldiers spent their time in trenches, facing not only the enemy but also poor living conditions. Trenches were cold, muddy, and full of rats, making diseases a constant threat. The daily routine involved enduring artillery barrages, preparing for attacks, and living with the fear of death. Challenges and difficulties faced by soldiers. The challenges for soldiers were immense. They had to deal with 1. Trench warfare. This style of fighting meant long, drawn-out battles where progress was slow and conditions were dire. Trenches were muddy, cramped, and often infested with rats and lice. 2. Shell shock. Constant bombardments led to a psychological condition now known as post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD. At the time, it was poorly understood, and soldiers suffered greatly. 3. Chemical warfare. Poison gas was a new, terrifying weapon that caused blindness, burns, and death. Soldiers had to carry gas masks and remain vigilant at all times. 4. Hunger and disease. Food supplies were often scarce, and diseases like dysentery, typhus, and the flu spread rapidly through the ranks, causing significant casualties. Why was the war at a standstill in France? The Western Front, particularly in France, became a stalemate because of the nature of trench warfare. Both sides dug in, creating extensive trench networks that stretched from the North Sea to the Swiss border. The defensive technology of machine guns and barbed wire made it extremely difficult for attacking forces to advance without suffering massive casualties. The strategy of over-the-tops attacks, where soldiers would leave their trenches to charge the enemy, often resulted in slaughter. This led to a prolonged deadlock with no side able to gain a decisive advantage. Why did the strategy of taking France fail? Germany's initial plan, known as the Schlieffen Plan, was to quickly defeat France by invading through Belgium, bypassing French fortifications. The goal was to avoid a prolonged two-front war by knocking out France before Russia could mobilize. However, the plan failed due to several factors. 1. Belgian resistance. The Belgian army put up more resistance than expected, slowing down the German advance. 2. British intervention. Britain entered the war in response to Germany's invasion of neutral Belgium, adding another major force against Germany. 3. Logistical issues. The German forces were stretched too thin, and their supply lines could not keep up with the advancing troops. 4. Battle of the Marne. The French, with British support, managed to halt the German advance at the Battle of the Marne, leading to a prolonged stalemate. Why were the Germans so successful against the Russians on the Eastern Front? While the Western Front was locked in a stalemate, the Eastern Front was more fluid. Germany had several advantages against Russia. 1. Better coordination. German forces were better trained, coordinated, and had superior leadership. Generals like Paul von Hindenburg and Erich Ludendorff were particularly effective. 2. Russia's weaknesses. The Russian army was poorly equipped, and the country's infrastructure was not capable of supporting a modern war effort. There were shortages of weapons, ammunition, and even basic supplies. 3. Tactical superiority. The Germans used effective tactics to encircle and destroy Russian armies, particularly in battles like Tannenberg in 1914, where they decisively defeated a much larger Russian force. How did the war end? The war came to an end on November 11, 1918, when an armistice was signed. Several factors contributed to this. 1. Exhaustion of resources. Both sides were exhausted, but the Central Powers, especially Germany, were running out of resources faster. British naval blockades had severely limited supplies. 2. U.S. entry. The entry of the United States in 1917 provided fresh troops and resources to the Allies, tipping the balance in their favor. 3. Internal collapse. By 1918, Germany was facing internal unrest, strikes, and calls for revolution. Austria-Hungary and the Ottoman Empire were also collapsing, and Bulgaria had already surrendered. Consequences of the World War I. The consequences of World War I were profound and far-reaching, impacting economies, societies, and politics worldwide. The war resulted in over 16 million deaths, including 9 million soldiers and 7 million civilians. Many more were wounded or left with long-term physical and psychological effects. The massive loss of life, along with the destruction of towns, farms, and industries, devastated Europe. Economically, the war drained national treasuries, and countries were left in heavy debt. The Treaty of Versailles, which ended the war, imposed harsh reparations on Germany, demanding vast payments and resource transfers. This crippled the German economy and led to hyperinflation, unemployment, and widespread poverty, setting the stage for political instability and the rise of extremism. Politically, the war led to the collapse of 4 major empires: the German, Austro-Hungarian, Ottoman, and Russian empires. New nations emerged in Europe and the Middle East, often with borders drawn by the victorious allies, sowing future conflicts. The League of Nations was created to prevent another global conflict, but it lacked authority and failed to maintain peace. World War I left a legacy of economic hardship, political turmoil, and social changes, setting the conditions for World War II. Thank you for watching. If you found this video informative, please like, subscribe, and share for more content like this.